Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse here on the Bible Forum. This is Sunday night, July 25th, and we are looking at the battle for our future. I don't know if you noticed this or not. You may not have seen it. I hope you have. But there was a recent man on the street type interview being conducted on college campuses. It's making the rounds. It's on YouTube. It's everywhere. But this was a guy asking students, what is the definition of socialism? As he began his dialogue with them, he questioned them and found out that they believed in socialism. They considered themselves socialists. But not one of them knew what socialism really is. But they do know it's better than what we have now. Where would you get an idea like that? One student said, it's definitely more of an open form of government, and it feels a lot more accessible to a lot more people. And that's kind of how I see it, like being more accessible and more kind and like equal ground. Yeah. And the reporter said, what you're saying. What does that mean? And the student said, to be quite honest, I don't know. Young people, education system. In an article written last month in the New York Times, 29-year-old Sarah Leonard suggested that millennials are turning to socialism in droves. And she said the reason is that capitalism has let them down. Her words, across Europe and the United States, millennials are worse off than their parents were and are too poor to start new families. In the United States, they are loaded with college debt or far less likely to be employed without a college degree and are engaged in precarious and non-unionized labor. Also, the earth is melting. Leonard goes on to say that a recent Harvard survey found that about a third of the U.S. population says it supports socialism. And so inquiring minds want to know, what's going on? Well, the answer is, this is what's going on after 70 years of progressive indoctrination, along with the dumbing down of our educational system to make sure young people don't or can't think or reason for themselves, along with the profane culture that caters to selfishness and greed. Alexis de Tocqueville, writing in the mid-1800s, had an opinion about this. In a nutshell, Tocqueville suggests that socialism denies the individual the right to think and to act for himself. Now, a third and final trait, which in my eyes best describes socialists of all schools and shades, is a profound opposition to personal liberty and scorn for individual reason, a complete contempt for the individual, he said. They unceasingly attempt to mutilate, curtail, or obstruct personal freedoms in any and all ways. They hold that the state must not only act as the director of society, but must further be master of each man, and not only master, but keeper and trainer. Tocqueville, France, 1800s. For fear of allowing him to err, he said the state must place itself forever by his side, above him, around him, better to guide him, to maintain him, in a word, to confine him. They call, in fact, for the forfeiture to a greater or lesser degree of human liberty, to the point where, were I to attempt to sum up what socialism is, I would say that it was simply a new system of serfdom. End of quote. Hear anybody describing progressivism that way? Bernie, perhaps? Tocqueville concludes by saying democracy and socialism have but one thing in common, and that's equality. But note well the difference. Democracy aims at equality in liberty. Socialism desires equality in constraint and in servitude. These are very strong words, but they are not as strong as that of Lenin's. According to him, socialism brings everything in society under control of the government. And the government, runs all of this for the interests of the whole people. His quote: "If American young people were truly educated and knowledgeable on the meanings of words like socialism, communism, capitalism, liberty, it seems likely far fewer of them would be supporting any of the above." Keep in mind, these kids don't even know what it is they believe. Do you? Our old friend C.S. Lewis wrote on this topic. He wrote on the idea of the attack on democracy in his book entitled The Screwtape Letters. In the 1930s and 1940s, Lewis suggested that destroying a person's individuality was the way to destroy their very soul. In the voice of Uncle Screwtape, a devil who is writing his nephew, Wormwood, Screwtape argues that democracy now does what tyrants used to do. He tells a story of one dictator asking another for advice. The second dictator takes him into a cornfield and with his cane begins to snick off any corn stalk that's an inch or so taller than the others. And the moral was plain: let no preeminence among your subjects. Let no man live who is wiser or better or more famous or even handsomer than the mass. Cut them all down to level. All slaves, all ciphers, all nobodies, all equals. Thus tyrants can practice, in a sense, democracy. But now democracy can do the same work without any other tyranny than her own. No one needs now go through the field with a cane. The little stalks will now of themselves bite the tops off the big stalks. The big ones are beginning to bite off their own in a desire to be like-minded with the little stalks. Dunces and idlers must not be made to feel inferior to intelligent and industrious students. That would be undemocratic. Individual differences must be disguised. Children who are fit to proceed to a higher class may be artificially held back because the others would get a trauma. And those who would excel will be democratically fettered to his own age group throughout his school career. Do any of you in this audience remember when students who were able to move faster were placed in advanced classes in school? I'm not sure when any of that stopped, but it was after I graduated from high school. And that was 1961. In those days, there were at least 2 levels, and often 3. There was the college prep level. There was a business level and a general level. And there was often a remedial level in there somewhere. We don't have any of that anymore. So the result is that good students are kept down, frustrated, bored. Why? Well, out of deference to the feelings of those with lesser ability, which means over half the class. The average American has an IQ of less than 100. Now, that may not mean a whole lot to you, but if you start looking around, for people who are successful in business, people who start businesses, people who achieve things and have live a decent life with a decent home and car, middle class, they have an IQ over 100, 120, 30, 40, 50, 60. Over half the class would have an IQ of less than 100. These folks range from having practical minds to not being comfortable with abstract concepts to almost no ability to reason in practical ways at all. Screwtape goes on to say, of course, while tyranny is to be preferred, do not underestimate the seeds of self-destruction inherent in democracy. Now keep in mind, Screwtape's a devil. For democracy, he says, is the democratic spirit, meaning the diabolical sense, which leads to a nation without great men, a nation mainly of subliterates, morally flaccid from lack of discipline and youth, full of the cocksureness which flattery breeds on ignorance, and soft from lifelong pampering. Any of that sound familiar? And that, he says, is what hell wishes every democratic people to be. But he warns, don't labor under the delusion that the fate of nations is more important than that of individuals. The ultimate value for us, demons, of any revolution, war, or famine lies in the individual anguish, treachery, hatred, rage, and despair which it may produce. Any of this ring true? There is a movement afoot to ban homework in school. Now, that's not a new idea. Every kid who ever went to school hated homework, and there's been 1,000 of these things come along. But behind this latest ban is a rationale, a revelation that underlies the principle and expresses what Screwtape just explained. According to one school superintendent, the decision to ban homework for students was based on research. The research of a reading specialist, a guy by the name of Richard Allington. It is Allington who makes an interesting revelation about the state of American homework. In a word, he says, it's worthless. I know it's 2 words. I don't write this stuff, I just read it. He said the quality of homework assigned is so poor that simply getting kids to read was a more powerful alternative. Maybe some kinds of homework might raise achievement, but if so, that type of homework is uncommon in U.S. schools. Now, I was always taught that homework was a sample of what you just learned that would reinforce what you learned or reveal weaknesses in what you just learned. So tomorrow you could come back and let me see your homework, and the teacher would have a measuring stick. And I realize not all teachers did it that way, but that's the way it was supposed to be done, I think. So even if the experts are admitting that homework is of no use, why has it been encouraged all these years? Former Teacher of the Year John Taylor Gatto has a theory about that. He says, today the tabulation of hours in a young life reads like this: 55 hours a week for TV, that's according to studies. 56 hours of sleep, that's 8 hours, which I think is a little high. I don't think kids are getting 8 hours sleep anymore. 57 hours in which to grow up strong and competent and whole. But children attend school 30 hours or more, spend 8 hours preparing for school and in going and coming, and an additional 7 hours a week in something called homework. That's an additional 45 hours a week. Where are we getting it from? In Gatto's opinion, homework is simply more schoolwork, and it's a redundancy if the schools were doing their job. Note the underlying premise here is children don't have time. But also note 55 hours of television every week. That's almost 8 hours a day. I grew up in the 50s. Yeah, we had TV. Television wasn't mine. There was one of them. And if anything else was going on in the house, we had visitors, or there was anything happening where people had to pay attention, that thing either got turned way down to where you could hardly hear it, or it was off completely. And if I spent 2 hours a week watching television, it was a lot. And most of that was Saturday night with Gunsmoke before I went to bed. The expert believes this is creating dependent human beings, needy people, unable to fill their own hours, unable to initiate lines of meaning, unable to give substance and pleasure to their existence, and therefore it's not only unnecessary, it's destructive. And he asks, are American parents and teachers and administrators recognizing that conditioning children toward dependency simply doesn't work? That the more they can break out of the mold of the system, the better it is for the next generation and the country at large? I call this demented logic. It doesn't have any basis in reality. Give in to children watching television more than 7 hours a day on average, rather than doing things that would help them be productive as individuals, as people, as citizens, as family members, and to learn. This is America, 21st century. And this is America driving through the mountains with Thelma and Louise.